Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Thanks again for tuning back into the channel. This go around, gonna be giving my thoughts around the Arizona Preps annual fall showcase as I was out in Arizona again this past weekend and was able to watch some basketball the week prior. Was out at the AZ High School Boys Jamboree event out there at the Arizona Athletic Grounds. So was able to catch some more games, attended the event with my brother. So kind of just going to go over my thoughts again on the event, similar to what I did last week. I'll try and keep this a little bit shorter. Given I think the last episode was about 25 minutes long, so I'll try not to take up too much of your guys' time here. So I'll kind of just jump in. We'll kind of start with general thoughts on the overall event, the venue, talk about some of the team breakdowns based off of what I saw, and then kind of close it out again with where my rankings stand now after this next weekend of watching some more high school basketball. So overall, general thoughts on the event. I thought it was pretty solid. I'd still rank probably the Jamboree a lot higher. If I had to give a rating on that last week, it was probably an 8.5 or a 9. This week, it was a little bit weird. It was kind of marred, I feel like, by some of the teams I was personally interested in watching not playing their full roster. So, for example, Deer Valley was one of the teams I was interested in watching again. They brought most of their bench, so didn't really get to get a good view of what they were about. Perry and Deer Valley, two teams in the AIA, were supposed to play one another again. Perry, for that first game, didn't bring their starting roster either, so that game was kind of a wash. Didn't really make sense to watch that, in my opinion. And then, really, the more interesting one was St. Mary's. They didn't have any of their starting roster playing as well. And I was kind of intrigued to watch them too because they were going and playing Mesa. And so I thought them versus Mesa's starting five would have been really interesting. So a little bit unfortunate that we didn't get to see some of those matchups. Either way, though, there were still some good games. The event started off kind of slow with some, I wouldn't say snoozer games, but just not as entertaining. And then really, once it hit the 4 p.m. window, that's when things started to pick up. Higley played a couple games. Those were really entertaining. Chandler had their full roster. Mesa and Carl Hayden played in a really good one. They brought their full rosters. So I'd say before that 3 to 4 p.m. window, it was probably like a 3.5, a 4 out of 10. That probably bumped it to a 6.5 out of 10. So solid event there. So yeah, not too much more to complain about there. Pretty good stuff. And for me too, I'm mostly focused on the AIA. I know there were quite a few prep schools and teams from the Canyon Athletic Association and other leagues. Me personally, I mostly focus on AIA and a lot of the public schools, so I'm not as invested with the prep schools. So that also is kind of why some of the games weren't as entertaining for me. But overall, still some good stuff being mixed in there. And then with that, some of these AIA teams were playing some CAA teams, so it was kind of tough to tell how good some of these teams are because they're playing against teams that technically aren't in their league. Apollo being a prime example of this. They, in their two games, then they played Sequoia Charter and then some other prep schools. So for me, it was kind of difficult to gauge how good they really are. But either way, it was still good to go in there and watch the event there. The only thing I'll mention with the event is, for some reason, on all the other courts it seemed fine, but on court one, for some reason, the scorekeeping was just not up to par. It felt like the refs had to go over there and stop the clock every 3 to 4 minutes to fix a score bug error. So that kind of ruined the flow in a little bit of the games, but overall, stuff was still pretty entertaining there. So those are my overall thoughts on the event there. So probably what I'm going to do here is just going to do a breakdown by team here, kind of go team by team, and then talk about what I saw, who I was impressed with, who I wasn't as impressed with, and kind of just go from there. So we'll start at the top, I think deservingly so, with Higley. They were a team that I was eager to watch at the Jamboree last week and again this week. They didn't disappoint. They brought their whole roster again, so probably the most entertaining AIA team to watch. My main takeaway, Izaiah Ryder, the freshman point guard, absolutely unbelievable. He is the truth. By far the best freshman in the state. I think I said this last week. He does not play like a freshman. He plays like a seasoned vet, like he's an upperclassman, like he's a senior, and he's been doing it for a while, and he can do it all. He's a composed ball handler, finds the open man, if he needs to drive to the basket or take his own shots, he can do so. He has one of the most pure releases I've seen from a freshman in a long time. Just a really pure shooter, and I guess that's kind of just what to be expected when, your dad did play in the NBA. So when you're raised by someone that played in the NBA, you're probably going to get a lot of good training, and it definitely shows. So Ryder, just really, really impressive. Looked amazing out there this past week. Really, really fun to watch. And then him, and then shooting guard Noah Gloor. I think they combined for probably 10 3-pointers in the game against AZ Compass Grind. So they just could not miss. Unbelievable 3-point percentage. The one thing I learned, if you're playing against Higley, probably don't play a 2-3 zone, because that's what AZ Compass Prep Grind was playing. More of an extended 2-3 zone that went beyond the 3-point line once they started hitting threes. And then when they were doing that, it allowed them to drive into the lane a little bit more. But yeah, don't let these guys shoot. They looked really good there. Marquice Pless too looked pretty solid in the first half of that game. But overall, Higley, they've kind of moved up in my rankings just a tad. Really solid team. Not much more to add there. Next up, Apollo. So they played in the earlier window. Again, like I said, against those two prep schools. Really, for me, with Apollo, the one thing that was, that stood out to me was just the play of Izaiah Rawlings. He's the sophomore point guard. I've never gotten to watch him before. This is my first time getting to see him, and he is something special. He's definitely the motor that keeps this team running. Without him, I think the team would probably be kind of lost. Excellent court vision, excellent passer. Really was just dropping dimes all over the court. So he was really fun. And then the good thing with him too is, he can be an effective scorer if he needs to. So there were points where, he would go and drive, go for some step back shots, got some points for his teams, but particularly he was thriving at feeding his teammates and giving them the best looks. So really interesting, really intriguing player to watch, and I'm hoping I'll be able to get to watch him a little bit more in the future here as the season goes on. Another player I was just kind of intrigued by was Emmanuel Angok. He's the 6'8" starting power forward. I think he's a senior there this year. With him, obviously a little bit taller, lankier, movement not as smooth. Sometimes is a little bit weak with the ball, with handling the ball. But still, he had some bright moments. And, when you have a 6'8" guy on the defensive side too, it's going to be difficult for teams to score. So I think he'll still be a pretty good playmaker there. But Apollo, I would expect them. They're in the 6A West Valley region. I would expect them and West Point to compete for that region title. And yeah, most likely, they're going to be in the 6A playoffs, no problem. They'll probably get into the Open as well. As far as making a run in the Open, probably not. But I do think they, if they get knocked into the 6A tournament, then they could possibly win a couple games there. So pretty solid looking team. Next up, Chandler. Talked about them, I think, a little bit last week. Basically carried over their same roster from Section 7 and then from last week in the Jamboree. Still no Donovan Palmer, who is their starting center. He is ranked number 1 in the class of 2028 for his position. So technically not at full strength. For me, I'm kind of out of the news. I don't know, unless there's been news that maybe he transferred or something based on the last time I saw him at Section 7. I don't know. If that's the case, then that would certainly drop them down the rankings a little bit. But as far as I'm aware, he is playing. He is on the team. He just hasn't been at the last couple events. So I guess we'll see once the season starts. But for them, Chandler, they played Deer Valley, and then they went ahead and played Higley. The Deer Valley game was kind of interesting because, like I mentioned, Deer Valley didn't bring their full roster, so it was all just bench players, basically. And it was a surprisingly competitive game, which, if you're Chandler, definitely not ideal to see that your starting roster is playing in a tight game against Deer Valley's mostly bench. But I think this honestly says more about Deer Valley just being really good than it does, and having a lot of depth than it does Chandler, struggling at that end. I think Deer Valley is just well coached, so kind of a throwaway game for Chandler. I wouldn't be too concerned. I will say they did look pretty solid against Higley in their second game. Brandon Stapleton, in particular, looked fantastic in the first half against Higley, driving to the basket a lot, creating a lot of his own mid-range shots, hit a couple from 3, and so he was kind of the key reason why they were in the game throughout the first half, and it gave them. And the game kind of got away from them in the second half a little bit. I think Higley may have won by at least 10 points, but they did show some competitive drive and look good. So overall, I was still impressed with Chandler at the tournament there. Well, technically, it wasn't a tournament, but just at the event. Next up, Mesa. Mesa, we only watched them for the first game they played against Carl Hayden, just because when they played St. Mary's, they didn't really play their starters a ton with them playing the St. Mary's bench. But in the Carl Hayden game, really, really interesting game, because for the most part, Kai Miles, their phenom sophomore point guard, didn't do too much. Carl Hayden was playing really interesting against them because they were trapping anytime Kai crossed midcourt, immediate trap on him. So he had to get rid of the ball a lot and couldn't really create as much of his own offense. So a lot of the scoring did rely on freshman Innocent Onwo, Daijon, Grayson, and Joshua Stewart. And honestly, they all looked pretty solid. They all contributed pretty well. Innocent Onwo, freshman, does not look like a freshman. Guy could ball, hit a couple pretty big shots. And then Grayson and Stewart with, the upperclassmen leadership, they all looked pretty good there. Again, really competitive game. They honestly, that game could have gone either way. Flip a coin. They eked out the win, but a little bit of a shaky performance from them. Not the best event for the team this go around, but I still have them as a highly ranked team here going into the season. There is a reason they went to the 6A state championship last year. They have a ton of good players. They have all the pieces. Probably just going to need them to mesh a little bit more as the season goes along. So not going to be too concerned with them, but definitely I wouldn't say they're, an open state title contender. And then moving on here, Carl Hayden. Speaking of Carl Hayden, that's the team Mesa played against there. They were by far the most impressive team. They really, really were intriguing. They did not look particularly well at the Jamboree last week, but they really came to life at this event. I think last week they went 0 for 3 in all their games, lost to Basha, understandably, and then dropped games to Mountain Point, who is a top 5A team, and then also West Point. Not the best event for them. They may have been missing players. I'm not 100% sure because I didn't get to watch them a ton, but this was a clear night and day performance from what it was last week. Again, they arguably should have beaten Mesa. They had them on the ropes near the end. And so it was kind of good to see a lot of their roster. We finally got to see, or at least I did, Davion Rhymes play last week. He wasn't playing. Prince Cash, the senior, he was honestly unreal in the first half, basically hitting every single shot he was putting up. Really, really good contributor. The thing with this Carl Hayden team, they all have scores. They have scores across the entire court. So it was, everyone contributed pretty well, and everyone was kind of doing their part. They looked much more fluid. So really good. Joseph Lindsay as well. He's their starting point guard. Looked pretty solid. The other player too that really impressed me with that team was freshman Remy Rose coming off the bench. He was the point guard. Again, this is my first time being able to see him. Really, really lethal scorer. Obviously you probably don't want to play him and Lindsay at the same time if you got 2 point guards, but if Lindsay needs a break, Remy Rose off the bench, it's going to be really good. Azariah Reetz too. He's the freshman. I don't know exactly what his height is. He's probably at least 6'6", 6'7", but another tall kid there. So he'll be able to dominate in the post there. But yeah, overall they looked really good against Mesa. I definitely had to move them up in my rankings for good reason. If they can maintain this level of consistency, then yeah, definitely watch out for them in 5A. They're certainly a top 5 team, I'd say, in 5A. It's probably Central the clear-cut number 1. And then really you could throw in Willow Canyon, Centennial, Carl Hayden, Mountain Point, Ironwood, all bunched into there. So it's going to be a pretty stacked, pretty competitive 5A conference this year, which is going to be good to see. Really, really impressive stuff from them. Perry was one of those teams in the first game against Deer Valley. They didn't play any of their starters. So we actually left the event for a little bit, went and got some food, and then came back. And then they played against PHH Prep in their second game. No Victor Babbage, but LJ Diamond was playing, and Kobe Barnes was out there. Basically their entire roster besides Babbage was there. The one thing, I was keeping an eye on was just watching LJ Diamond, just because he kind of caught my eye last week, looked really good. So obviously a great player on offense, but I don't know if it was just this event in particular or if I just didn't notice it last week. Didn't really give a ton of effort on defense. So Yeah, great player on offense, but just wasn't putting a lot there on defense. I'm hoping that it was kind of just that way because it is a preseason event, probably not going as hard as possible. So I'm assuming once the regular season starts, his defensive intensity will pick up. If not, I'd say that's probably a cause for concern for Perry, as teams are probably he could end up being some sort of defensive liability if teams are just going to be able to score. Again, don't see that as a cause for concern right now, but if for some reason it happens to be that way after game one, that'll kind of just be interesting to watch there. Gilbert High School, this was my first time getting to watch them here. Got to watch them a little bit at the start as they played against Arcadia. A couple things, Cruz Kazmierski, starting shooting guard for them. He's a freshman, solid ball handler, effective at getting to the basket. He looked pretty good. Kyle Speed was probably their best, most impactful player. He's a transfer from ALA Gilbert North, so he should definitely provide a solid boost to the team overall. With Gilbert, they're a really young crew, so I don't expect them to, make a ton of noise this year as they're in the same region as Higley and Highland, so that's going to be really competitive. So for a lot of their younger players, a lot of them, they're a lot of underclassmen. This is going to be a good season for them to kind of get those reps in, play against these high quality teams, and I think give them a year or two once Kazmierski is an upperclassman, once Speed, if these players stay, once he's a senior, if they grow, they're going to be one of the top teams in 6A in a couple years. So definitely room for optimism with this team. I think they could still definitely be a 6A playoff contender. They'll probably get into the Open. So should be a fun little season for those guys out there. So looking forward to seeing what they can do. Arcadia High School, this is another team I was interested in watching, mainly for the fact of them having Jacoby Thompson, one of the top incoming freshmen in the state. He was not playing. I asked one of the players where he was. I think he said he was out in Vegas, maybe hanging out. Maybe he might be playing still with some of his club ball team, doing something there. But either way, didn't get to watch him. So still don't really have much to read on Arcadia and what they're going to look like once they're at full strength. And the games they did play, they look solid. Nothing too crazy. I still think in the 4A Desert Sky region, it's definitely St. Mary's who's number one, and then I'd say Cactus Shadows is still firmly ahead of Arcadia. But if Jacoby Thompson is the truth and looks really good, he's going to provide a spark for Arcadia, and then they should look pretty solid. And then lastly, just to close it out, Deer Valley and St. Mary's, again, talked about it a little bit. They didn't bring their full roster. Was disappointed I couldn't get to watch their starters, especially because St. Mary's brought their starters, but they were just sitting on the bench and not playing. So that was kind of interesting to see that. Deer Valley, again, even when they played against Chandler with their bench, they looked really impressive. So this just goes to show you how much depth they actually have. And then once they get their full roster back into the swing of things and they're starting in the regular season and playing, they're going to be, again, one of the top teams in 4A. I'd say it's St. Mary's and then Deer Valley. So they're a team I would certainly watch out for there. And yeah, so that's everything I have from a team breakdown perspective. I will pull up on the screen right here. I'm just going to share my rankings. So this is kind of where I'm at now after attending the AZ Preps Fall Showcase event. The top four are going to be the same week over week. I'm anticipating the top four are going to be the same throughout the entire season, if I'm being completely honest. Millennium, you could arguably put them into just tier one by themselves. I do think they're that dominant. I think without Kate Snyder, like I said last week, at Sunny Slope, it's going to hurt them a little bit. They're still going to be good because they're Sunny Slope and they're always good, but Millennium by far is the clear favorite. Sunny Slope, for now, I'll keep them in tier one together. Basha and St. Mary's, nothing has been done that would tell me that they would, not be the third and fourth spots. Tier 3, a little bit of some shakeup here. Higley looked really impressive, even though they lost to AZ Compass Grind. I just can't deny the talent of Izaiah Ryder and really everybody else in that team. So I actually moved him up above Highland. I got him in my 5th spot. Highland dropped him down. Central staying. Deer Valley, I kind of just moved him up mainly because they're so good, even with their bench. They have a ton of depth. So, and they're just a well-coached program. They always have been. And so I wanted to give them the nod, moved him up to 8. Brophy, I still think they're going to be a really good team. Hale Hansen, didn't get to watch him play last year because he was hurt, but he's going to provide a spark for them. Mesa Had to drop them down just a tad because kind of the lackluster performance from this past week. But overall, I still think they're a really good team, and still definitely deserving of a top 10 ranking. As far as teams that are on the outside looking in, Chandler, I actually moved him up a couple slots just because they overall looked really impressive. And assuming Donovan Palmer didn't transfer again, I don't really have any news on that, and he's back. I expect good things from them, and I think they're probably better than Perry and Sandra Day. So I had him jump because of that. Drop down Perry and Sandra Day, and then rounding out that 14 through 16 slot, Willow Canyon, Liberty, Mountain Point. Honestly, you could probably flip all three of those if you wanted to. You can make an argument, but that's kind of just where I have it standing there. So that's where I got everything. These rankings, by no means are set for me. I still have to do a lot of research and compile what I think the starting rosters are going to look like for every team in the 4A through 6A conferences. So, by the time the season starts, I believe it's November 18th or 19th, these are probably going to look quite a bit different. Again, 1 through 4 are probably going to stay the same before the season starts, but I would expect shuffling between the 5 to 15, 5 to 20 range, certainly there. So yeah, definitely subject to change. If you don't agree with my rankings, please come at me. I'm more than happy to change my tune based on any other info or data you guys have. So please let me know. I'm not stubborn with my rankings. Definitely willing to make some changes there. So that's going to cover everything here. I'll drop these rankings off the board. Again, thanks again for taking the time to join in and listen up on this series. I probably won't post anything from a podcast or video perspective until we get closer to the season, which again, I think is the 18th or the 19th. So coming up here, it's getting here really fast. Maybe some sort of like team previews or some short updates on my rankings and kind of where I stand there. But other than that, probably going to stay more on the down low. If you guys want any more content or want to hear any other my thoughts on some of the teams or rankings or, kind of how I'm going about my thoughts here, drop it in the comments and, be more than happy to discuss those there. But thanks again, guys. Looking forward to it. A couple weeks of the season. So let's hopefully get there sooner rather than later. Looking forward to it all. And thanks again, guys. Have a good night.